Coming up on Not the End, NDE.
And in this space is where I met our creator, and I met Source. I met the essence of the universe. Many religions call this God, although I feel like calling it God puts it in such a tiny little box when it was so beautiful and so loving and so unjudgmental. It was just the embrace of love. If I was love, I was expansive as love, and it was absolutely phenomenal.
Many have died and returned to tell of their near-death experiences. Their incredible stories reveal to the living that this is not the end.
Hi, my name is Bri Lafferty, and I had a near-death experience in April of 2017, and I'm here to tell you about my story. It started off really when I was a child, and I came down with a rare chronic neurological movement disorder, and it would take me 8 years to get diagnosed. And in that time, I was misdiagnosed, undiagnosed, and put on a ton of different prescription medications. When those caused side effects, they just gave me more medication to counteract those side effects. And by the time I was 18, I was finally diagnosed. But at that time, they're like, it's really rare. We don't know what to do for you. We've already tried all the pharmaceutical options. In the meantime, we had tried holistic options, Eastern medicine, Chinese herbs. You think of it, we probably tried it. My mom was always searching for anything that could provide relief or cure or anything, and it just kind of got grueling as time went on. By the time I was 15, I had a deep-rooted sense and knowing that I was going to die before I reached the age of 28. I relayed this to my mom, and she took me very seriously, and we kind of lived our lives under the presumption that I would possibly die before I reached 28. Also, when I was a teenager, I experienced a lot of paranormal activity, metaphysical abilities that I didn't understand. I didn't have a community of spiritual people that were outside of the church, where my church told me it was demonic or it was sinful to be able to see auras and have, these empathetic feelings and be able to do these things. Even though the church I was raised in told me, well, Jesus said you can do all this and more, and yet I could do more, and the church said I couldn't. So growing up, I was facing this progressing, rare, incurable neurological movement disorder. It was very painful. It had a lot of nerve pain, a lot of muscle cramping, non-epileptic seizures, and it was also psychologically damaging. I had super bad anxiety, depression, OCD, and major insomnia. I had insomnia to the point that I would sometimes sleep maybe 1 hour every 3 days, or no sleep for 2 days. I mean, not even a cat nap, not even, 15 minutes of closing my eyes for rest. And that was also very draining. However, I never let myself be classified as a sick person. I never identified as a sick person, and I hated when people tried to offer their sympathy for me. I didn't need their pity, and I was determined to make the most of the life that I had, especially having a sense of knowing I was going to die early. I wanted to make the most out of my life. But it was hard. It was very debilitating, and I tried my best to hide it from the world. I was able to buy a house, go to college, start a career, and start climbing my way up the ladder. But the illness got so bad at one point that I sold my house and took the proceeds and ran away to die. I ran away from my family and everything I knew, 1,400 miles, and just wanted to live out the rest of my life in what I thought would be a beautiful place. It was warm, there was a lot of sun, it was my favorite, and I just really tried to embrace what I could when I could. Well, my mom, who never stopped giving up hope, never stopped searching, came across spiritual release therapy. SRT therapy is when somebody who is trained comes in and helps remove entities that have attached to somebody. And this is different than exorcism, because exorcisms is when a dark entity or a demonic presence is possessing somebody, where a spiritual release therapy is when it is oppressing somebody. It is more feeding off of the individual. And my mom read that it could cause these weird illnesses that doctors just don't know what to do and are untreatable until you remove the entities. At this point, I had about 10 years of trying different alternative therapies and all sorts of things. I tried regular therapy as well for those doctors who said, oh, it's just psychogenic, it's all in your head, and it's conversion disorder. And I was like, okay, at least these alternative therapies haven't had the repercussions that pharmaceuticals had on me. I always was the 1%. I would react to everything, and it would usually make things worse, or I'd have a whole other horrific side effect. So I agreed to go through with this spirit release therapy. I was told that you can get a little sick with spirit release therapy. It can feel a lot like the flu. You can have some vomiting, diarrhea, and all that stuff. And I was like, whatever. I don't think that's real. Come to find out, it is a very real thing. Not only can you become ill from spirit release therapies and exorcisms, but you can also become ill with moving too much into feng shui. As a feng shui practitioner, my mom would warn her clients that if you move too much in your house or your home or your office all at once, you're disrupting all that energy, and you can come down with what they call the feng shui flu. If you are familiar with Dr. Joe Dispenza and Encephalon, if you've ever been to one of their week-long retreats, they warn you that you can come down with the Dispenza influenza, because it is, once again, a huge movement of energy, and it's a week of moving this energy. So spirit release therapy and even exorcisms are very similar in that you are moving this energy, you are disrupting energy and changing it. So now I totally understand how someone could become sick. However, I was massively declined on my illness, which was diagnosed as myoclonus dystonia by several different neurologists in several different institutions. So it is a confirmed diagnosis for myself. So I was heavily suffering from this illness. A lot of pain, no sleep, a lot of muscle rigidity and twitching, just no quality of life there. Then, of course, the insomnia on its own can be life disrupting. I happened to be able to function pretty normally for 2 or 3 days of no sleep. When I get to about 4 days, that's when my systems start going haywire. So I've got the chronic illness, insomnia, and then we throw on this spirit release therapy. And my body just could not take it. I become sick. I am basically married to the bathroom. I can't keep fluid down. I can't sleep. I'm uncomfortable. And this goes on for weeks. As I'm getting sicker and sicker, my family knows that something really bad is happening, and they book the fastest ticket they can to come fly to see me and help me. However, it wasn't soon enough, and I don't know, had they gotten there sooner, if things would have changed. We asked the practitioner to stop doing the therapy because I was getting very, very ill, and unbeknownst to us, she did not, and she continued behind the scenes. And this made the entities that were attached and that had been attached for a very long time, probably since I was 10 or 11, very upset and angry. And they became very violent and started attacking my mind and my thoughts, my psychology. And I just at one point was like, oh, you're feeding off the fear you're creating. I'm just not going to fear you then. So then they ramped up the attacks and it became physical. So you add that on top of everything else. And at 2:00 in the morning, after being on the phone with my mom for probably 3 days, almost straight, praying, doing affirmations, doing anything and everything we could to get me comfortable, to kind of stop these attacks, and nothing was working, I told her that I needed to hang up the phone because I was going to try to get some sleep. This was a lie. I knew there's no way I was going to be able to sleep, but I knew she needed to try to get some. She does not operate on little sleep, just period. I was going to say not as well as I do, but just period. So I hang up the phone at 2 a.m. And at that point, I am exhausted. I am exhausted on every single level you could think of. I'm exhausted physically. I'm exhausted mentally. I'm exhausted emotionally. And I didn't know it at the time, but I was also exhausted spiritually. I had been crying out and, asking this God to heal me. I was told if you just have enough faith, if your heart is pure enough, if you pray hard enough, God will heal you. And that never happened. So I didn't know if there was a God. I wasn't quite atheist, but I wasn't sure what was out there. I believed in intelligent design, but I had no idea what that looked like. I was so incredibly broken at this moment that I cried out with every ounce of me. That is my soul, my body, my heart, my mind. I just said, I give up. This is in your hands. I can't do it anymore. And as soon as I had that thought and had that feeling and felt it with everything, the world stood still. These entities had been ripped from me. The noises stopped. It was like 100 stadiums had been silenced. Weight had been lifted off of me. There was no pain. There was no aggravation. There were no attacks. And I felt complete serenity for the first time in my whole life. And then I heard this big booming voice, and it wasn't really external, nor was it internal. It was just ever present. And it asked, "Are you ready?" I didn't hesitate to say yes. I knew something huge had shifted after I surrendered, and I didn't even think about it for a second. And I just, with that same soul, heart, and mind, I exclaimed yes. And that is when it felt like 3 really hard pounds on my chest, and that is when my heart stopped. And at that moment, I was completely separate from my body. I was no longer aware of this identity of Bri or Brianna. I was no longer aware of this earth realm, and I was just expansive. I was expansive in this ever-expanding blackness. A lot of people call it a void, but I don't, because it wasn't lacking of anything. It was full of everything. It was the start of every beginning. It was every single energy, every single possibility. And it was just home, and it was love, and it was light, but the light maybe had been so bright it collapsed in on itself. And in this space is where I met our creator, and I met source. I met the essence of the universe. Many religions call this God, although I feel like calling it God puts it in such a tiny little box when it was so beautiful and so loving and so unjudgmental. It was just the embrace of love. If I was love, I was expansive as love, and it was absolutely phenomenal. Even though I wasn't familiar with who I was or where I had just come from, my consciousness knew something had changed. So I did have the thought, am I dead? Which, when I had that thought, 3 monks appear out of the darkness, just cross-legged and grinning giantly, as if to say, if you only knew. I thought, oh, well, that's curious. All right. Didn't put too much thought into it. Just, oh, curious. And they float back into the darkness. And as they float, disappear into the blackness, that's when I end up in this beautiful, vivid, bright tunnel. It's like a bright white blue tunnel, stunning. And I'm going through it at supersonic speed, it feels like. And there's binary code all around me, and I'm getting downloaded with this binary code, and I know I'm just getting this amazing information. I wasn't aware of what the information was at the time, but I just knew it was incredible and it would come to me when I needed it. After that tunnel, I end up in this completely white space. It was just very, very bright white. There was no walls, no floors, no doors or a roof or anything. It was just white. And in front of me was this huge pile of black numbers. And behind me, I didn't see, but I felt the presence of an ascended master teacher. And in front of me, I pick up these numbers, the only time I had a human-like body in this whole experience. And I throw it up in the air like a child and exclaim, "No wonder you love creating." Because I had the realization that Earth was created in math and numbers, and I was so excited. And right after that, I end up in the place where I would spend a majority of my experience, and this place had other beings. I wasn't sure if they'd ever been human. I didn't even know what a human was at that point. And they're just other beings, and a few of them were working on this machine or craft with a huge flame out of it, and one was on a ladder working by the flame. Some were just kind of communing over by a building. And then I look and I see some sliding down trees, and the trees are covered in snow. And I thought that looked like so much fun. But what if I don't like snow? And instantly I'm sliding down trees, but instead of snow, it's covered in luscious green moss. And I have this realization, what if that being sliding down the tree next to me is actually sliding down in snow because they like snow, but because I like green and the lushness and mossiness of this, I'm sliding down the green tree, but we're sliding down together simultaneously in separate realities. It was just very curious and very cool. I relate that to even here on Earth, we can have the same experience. Like, say you and your partner, or you and your friend go to a party or a dinner, and one of you has a great time. You thought the conversation was great. You had all the fun. You liked the games. You liked the food. And your partner is just like, "Oh, that person just could not be quiet. All they did was talk about their job. I was miserable. I couldn't wait to leave." You guys are both experiencing the same reality, the same situation, separately, but together. You have very different viewpoints. And that's kind of how I relate it to Earth these days. There was even a point in this time or this place where I tried to fly, and I tried to fly with some other beings. I was terrible at it. I ended up severing my arm on this tall pole. There was no pain. There was no fear. It was just like, curious. I wonder what's going to happen. And I saw my arm grow back together with binary code. The most ironic part of this whole place is I have this body of a snowman. I know the irony because I didn't like snow, and yet here I am appearing as a snowman. And I just have the thought, what happens if I get too close to that flame? Will I melt? Instantly, I am under that flame. I am melted. Once again, there's no pain, there's no fear, and I just have the thought, I wonder if anyone will put me back together. Sure enough, other beings put me back together. And my thoughts happened so fast. As soon as I had the thought, there was no chance to change it, negate it, move it. It just happened. It was even faster than telepathy, because telepathy, you think of having a thought is sending, somebody hearing it, thinking, receiving, and sending it back, and you receiving, digesting, and communicating that way. But it was so instantaneous. The thought instantly created the reality. It was absolutely curious. I was full of joy. I was full of curiosity. One point, me and these other beings started dancing, and we all moved in unison as if we had choreographed this dance for millennia. But there was nothing said ever, and we just moved as one, and it was very communal. At the end of this part of my experience, there was a barbed wire fence. And behind it, I couldn't see. It was very blurry. And there was a little opening. And some of the beings started to cross on a land bridge into this blurry place, this blurry abyss. It wasn't quite an abyss, but I knew where they were going. I couldn't follow. I was never asked. I wasn't sure where it was. I believed it to just be probably a higher realm or higher dimension, higher frequencies. And that is when I ended up in the last space of my experience in this dark room. And in front of me is this beautiful scroll with beautiful golden script just starting to be written on it. And behind me, the presence of 7 magnificent beings. Not quite as amazing and surreal as the creator I met in the darkness, but more powerful, more significant than the master ascended teacher I met in the white area. And this is the only time in my experience that I had any recollection of who Bri was and where I'd come from. And my ego decides to come back and says, "Ha, you're showing this to a human." Just like that, the script goes away, the scroll rolls up, and I've snapped back into my body. When I enter my body, I feel my heart start again. That was way weirder than feeling it stop. And even though I didn't know what had happened, I was kind of thinking I had died. And if I open my eyes, I'm going to be in a coffin underground, even though my wishes were to be cremated. So I'm kind of having a freak out moment. And before I open my eyes, I take a deep breath and try really hard to get back to the space. I call out again and I just try so hard to get back, and I couldn't. The time had felt like it had been months. It just felt so unreal, and I was positive I would be in a coffin. I also felt like I'd been stuffed into a sausage casing, and I finally opened my eyes and looked at my phone and saw it was 2:08. Then I had the thought, well, is it 2:08 a few weeks from the last I remember? Is it, no, my parents were coming. Is it 2:08 a few days later? And I rechecked the date and it had only been 8 minutes. Then the next day my parents arrive and I am a mess. I end up being a mess trying to deal with the aftermath of this crazy experience. Luckily, I found a wonderful group called Ions that started to help me with the processing. But I mean, walls felt weird. I could hear people's thoughts. I could feel people's pain. I came back as a medical intuitive. Reading minds was really creepy. And I just had a really rough time reintegrating into this life. It was like I was reborn, but instead of having that slow progression as a baby, slowly coming into this world, I was just thrown right back into it with kind of this new blank slate. And it was very, very difficult for the first 6 months for sure. And then probably I started coming to some terms with it in the next 18 months. Then I would go back into denial for a few years and really only start to embrace it at around year 5. And through all of that, through the chronic illness, through the darkness that I experienced growing up, the darkness that was removed from me during that NDE, I've not had any issues with these dark entities or paranormal activities since then. I'm so grateful. And I also am symptom-free, and that is a whole nother story, but it had to do strongly with my near-death experience. And there's a lot of things I learned, especially the reintegration, the hindsight of why did I have this crazy illness? Why did I have to go through all this pain and all this suffering? And what is the purpose? What is the reason? And 2 of the strongest lessons that I learned, one is reality is really not what it seems. It's basically a simulation of what our thoughts and our feelings project, and we can change it. We can absolutely change the simulation we are in. It's like a video game. It's like the Matrix. It's a simulation, and you do have control. And our perception creates reality, and our reality creates our perception. So the more you think a certain thought and feel a certain feeling, the more likely it is to appear in your life. I often say we are blessed with the gift of time, even though sometimes when you're trying to manifest, it's like, oh, I just want it to happen now. But in my near-death experience, things did happen now. There was no pain, there was no fear, there was no repercussion. Here we have the blessing of time because we, of course, get these negative, crazy, impulsive thoughts, especially when you're on a high place and you have that urge to jump and you're like, what if? Well, thoughts create reality, but here we have the gift of time. You can decide to step back. You can decide to hold on to a handrail. You can decide to, do a bunch of different things that won't lead to you actually jumping. So I call it blessing of time, even though it can be very frustrating. The other thing is I learned that every soul has a purpose, even through pain, sometimes especially through pain. There's really more that goes on behind the scenes than we realize. And we do sign up for these events that take place in our lives, good and bad. And we kind of sign this soul contract with things we're going to experience, things we want to experience while we're here. And a lot of people have asked me, well, how do we break that contract? Is that contract breakable? Well, they come to me when they're experiencing illness or pain or loss or grief and these hardships. And you've met those terms and conditions. You no longer, that the contract is completed. You do not need to keep fulfilling that contract. You can now end it because you have completed the terms and conditions of it. Sometimes we just don't realize that we have gotten there. It's kind of like, you've been building a house for a year and it's finally done. The finishes are done. Everything's in place. You've got occupancy, and then you keep building. You just keep, adding more frames, and you're running out of. Why would you keep building a house that is complete? It's kind of that same thing. So you can absolutely break your contract and terminate your contract because you have completed the terms and conditions. So in all reality, we create reality, and it is created mostly with our thoughts and our feelings. And we are here to experience everything. We get to experience the pain, the loss, the grief, the hurt, the abuse, but there's always a bigger purpose for it. If anyone needs help with this purpose, I've come back, especially as a medical intuitive, and some other amazing gifts that I now use to help people. I am a transitional guide. And if you would like my help, or if you just like to hear more about my story, there's so much more. I've got a few different books on it, and you can find all of that, all my socials, any way to reach out to me. If you just want to send me a quick hello, you can do that too. It's all on my website, which is BRI0NICLLC.com. You can find my email, my socials, my products, my books, my story, my services, and most of my podcast.
How is this story meaningful to you? If you're watching on YouTube, tell us in the comments. If you're listening to the podcast, leave a review and tell us there. If you or someone you know have a similar kind of story, please also leave that in the comments or send us a message at our website. Maybe we'll feature you. Visit NDE.com. Be blessed and a blessing, my friends.